On this episode of On the Brink, I'm introducing you to yet another of the Armeo sisters. Listen to Christine Armeo. She's the veterinarian in the family, and that's the subject of today's discussion. That's what they do, how they do it, and why they're having some trouble doing it. So, Christine, female vets, I understand, are 3.5 times more likely to die by suicide than the general population. Have you ever thought about suicide?
Only when I've had to do my sister's podcast or deal with my children, but never with veterinary medicine. No, I have not, but it is a serious problem, and I shouldn't be glib about it because it is a problem in the veterinary profession.
We will get to that in 1 minute. We're talking today with two veterinarians who work in Seneca Falls. One is my sister, Christine Armeo, Dr. Armeo. I'm going to slip, I know, Christine, and call you Kippy, her childhood name, and I mean no disrespect for that. But the really interesting vet, excuse me, Christine, is her...
Yeah, no disrespect.
No disrespect, is Dr. Carl Darby, who runs the Seneca Falls Animal Hospital. And you have a really interesting history as a vet, don't you, Doctor? You have a specialty in birds. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
Yes. Well, when I was a student, I was interested in avian medicine, and actually I went to vet school in England, and one of the leading avian vets was in New York. So I came over as a student to spend some time with him, and that just increased my interest in avian medicine. I ended up dating one of his technicians and marrying her, and I moved to New York after I graduated, and I spent almost 20 years working with him. His name was Dr. Robert Altman, and he was a real pioneer of avian medicine, and it was great. You know, we saw a lot of very interesting patients. And
what's the most interesting animal that you've treated?
Most interesting bird was a black palm cockatoo, which was at the Bronx Zoo, and this is a bird that's on the endangered species list, and they're incredibly rare. And we were very fortunate that we were able to help this incredibly rare bird back to health.
What was wrong with it?
It had a respiratory infection, and we managed to make it feel better. So it was a lot of stress because it was a very, very valuable bird, and they're very, very rare. But we did make her better. So
sort of like treating the president for a physician.
Yeah, kind of something like that. Yeah, or a celebrity, something like that.
So what you're talking about is really the glamour that we outsiders think of when we think of vets. Dr. Doolittle talking with the animals, saving them when they're in trouble, helping people. So why the distress? Why is there such a problem with suicide? In addition to, it's not just female vets, male vets have a 2 times greater chance of committing suicide than the general population. What's the trouble? Christine, why don't you take that?
Well, I think you can get both our points on that. And I mean, it's not a new problem. It's something that's been there. But I think the stress of COVID, for various reasons, brought that about. But, just like in the general population, suicide is influenced by clinical depression and other things like that. But there were certain things among veterinarians. One is our personality traits. I mean, we tend to be overachievers. To get into vet school, it's very difficult. So we tend to be overachievers. We look for perfectionism, and you're not going to find that in veterinary medicine. Okay. I mean, it was very stressful before we had COVID, when we, had to start doing curbside and lost all efficiency. But even before then, you have the stress of not just the sick animal, but, the owners who are, more worried. They're kind of like being a pediatrician, but we don't have the resources always available to us that you do for children, meaning that, sometimes things die in spite of you, unexpectedly, or lots of times owners have high expectations that, you can't do. They want you to fix your animal, but, not spend any money in doing it. There's also the thing of professional isolationism. I mean, you can get out of vet school, you can go right into practice. And now most practices are, at least 3 or 4 vets, but, you can be practicing there by yourself and not know really what the hell you're doing, and you don't have anything to bounce it off of. And those add into, all of the other.
Great stress.
Yes.
Dr. Darby, do you feel stress, or have you in the past in your career felt the sort of stresses that Christine is talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's a societal issue. I'm not sure that there's anything about being a veterinarian that is uniquely stressful. I think a lot of people have stressful jobs and suffer, and struggle at times in their life. I think I read that 50% of people at some point in their life, achieve, try and get help or put on medication for mental health issues. And I think the biggest problem in the veterinary profession, I think, is it starts from the selection of students. I think that oftentimes the reality of veterinary medicine is so far removed from the expectation that students get out into the veterinary field, and it's just not what they thought it was going to be.
Right.
And in vet school, there's generally quite good mental health support for the students. So they go from a situation where they're surrounded by expert veterinarians that know how to do everything. They've got good mental health support. They don't have any responsibility. And then all of a sudden, they're just thrown into general practice, and they have to deal with, the reality of their expectations that things don't go as smoothly in general practice as they do at vet school. They've got a workload to deal with. A lot of them are in substantial amounts of debt, which is quite stressful. They're not used to dealing with people on a one-to-one basis. They're used to the intern and the resident and the doctor stepping in at vet school to help them. And the other thing is, unfortunately, we have access to drugs, and that can lead to substance abuse issues, and it also can make it easier to end your life if you've got access to drugs that you can use to peacefully end your life. So I think it's a multi kind of factorial problem, and I worry that there's too much focus on the problem and not enough on potential solutions.
Some of the solutions.
Yeah.
Concurrent, Dr. Darby, with the suicide rates, which are shocking. There's a big shortage right now of veterinarians. Maybe are those two things related? The stress of the job, and the difficulty getting into school, or is it a separate issue?
I think on the whole it's a separate issue, but I think the biggest thing with suicide is we need better mental health care, and if you look at the medical profession as a whole, how long does it take to get to see a doctor, and some of these people that are really struggling with their mental health, they just don't get the support they get from the medical profession because there simply aren't enough mental health professionals to help them, and they struggle. And as Chris mentioned, we tend to be kind of type A kind of personalities. We don't reach out for help, because that's a sign of weakness. And I think what happens is they kind of downward spiral. There's nobody there to save them, and that's a problem. And there are some organizations, and I would be happy to plug one called the VIN Foundation, which I used to be on the board for, and one of the goals of this foundation is to provide mental health support for veterinarians that are struggling either with just stress-related issues, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's physical disability, and I think that's what we need to focus on is getting better support. These mental health issues are not going to go away. We can't fix those societal issues. We just have to give the veterinarians the support they need. I think that's the problem. I just don't think there's enough support, and I think that unfortunately these people end up taking their own life because of lack of that.
Victims. We are talking with two Seneca Falls veterinarians, Christine Armeo. Yes, there's nepotism involved here, and Dr. Carl Darby. Christine, you were going to add something about this. We're talking about the shortage of veterinarians and also high stress level.
I just wanted to say that when Carl was plugging VIN, I assume you're talking about the notonemorevet.org. Is that correct?
No,
Oh, okay.
Not One More Vet is another organization that's been
Okay.
set up to try and address the mental health, but I'm talking about the VIN Foundation, which
Yeah,
is a
okay.
charitable organization associated with VIN, the Veterinary Information Network. And we have a bunch of programs where if you're a veterinarian, you're experiencing some kind of problem, whether it be a mental health, a substance abuse, a physical problem, there are professionals that we can put you in touch with that can help you work through those issues. And we have support groups and regular meetings just to try and give the veterinarians that kind of support they need to work through these issues.
Work through and not kill themselves. I'm fascinated that veterinary medicine seems to be going the same way that my field, journalism, did. It is overwhelmingly women these days.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
that came about in journalism because wages were low, conditions were difficult. Some of the stress factors that you're talking about pertain to journalists who are not well thought of by the public. Is that happening in veterinary medicine, Christine?
Oh, it's already there. When I was in school almost 40 years ago, it was still mostly men. I mean, it was not mostly. I would say that it was like, 60, 40% women, 60% men. Now I think the classes are 85% women. And
Yeah.
a lot of that has come. I mean, I know I know a woman, actually, she just died, a veterinarian who, was in the class of 1958, and she was like the only woman in the class.
Mhm,
Okay.
mhm.
And a lot of it has come about because drugs are available. Women, I mean, traditionally, veterinary medicine was, mixed animal practice. You did a lot of large animal, and women just didn't have the strength to do that. And with the advent of drugs and feminism and whatever else, women got into the profession, and they're lots of times are considered more compassionate. So it's definitely much more of a woman's field now than it is men.
Do you have anything to add to that, Dr. Darby? Do you see this trend in your own practice and experience?
Oh, absolutely. When I graduated 33 years ago, my graduation class was about 50-50. It was almost an even split between males and females. And
Mhm.
I'm not really 100% sure why males seem to be backing away from the profession. If you look at some of the data, um, some of the guidance counselors say, well, men tend to be more attracted to the higher paying jobs. They go into business more often. And as Chris said, now with the advance of sedation protocols and the rise of companion animal veterinary medicine, you don't need to have physical strength to do the job. But I also think that for a lot of female veterinarians, it's a job that you can work part-time and still make a
Ah.
decent amount of money and have a family. And not to be a misogynist, I have several veterinary friends that are actually stay-at-home dads. And it's the same situation that I can work 20 hours a week, still make a decent amount of money, and have time for my family. So I think that's part of it too, that you can work part-time, and it still financially makes sense. I know for a lot of jobs, working part-time, when you add up daycare and everything, it just doesn't make any sense to do
Right.
that. But in
Right.
our profession, I think you can make enough that it's worthwhile to do
I
that.
invited my listeners to suggest some questions that I would pose to veterinarians. There's a huge interest in this, but one pattern that showed in all the some 100 questions that came in was a lack of awareness or understanding of the conditions of veterinary medicine. An indelicate question. They think you make a lot of money, that you can get rich being a vet. And they also think you have cushy hours. Can you tell me what the reality is? Christine, you're laughing already.
No, I was gonna say I'd let Carl do that. I mean, we were both business owners, and I've retired and sold my business, but he still owns it. You can make a decent living, but you know what? We have as much or more education than physicians do, and this is kind of a sticking point with a lot of veterinarians. But it's harder to get into vet school than it is to get into medical school. We come out with a lot more. Well, we come out with a lot of debt, especially these days. And physicians are already making tons more money than we do. I mean, I had looked up, and I think like the I don't know. I can't remember. I looked up the starting salary, the mean starting salary for graduates from the U.S. and the two Caribbean schools is 124,000, which sounds like a lot of money. Okay, and that's mean.
Mhm.
That's mean. I mean, it's more for private practice than it is for residencies or large animal and stuff. But the average debt is 185,000. So, and some kids come out of school with like $300,000 in debt because they get into vet school and they think, oh, this is great. This is always what I've wanted to do. And then they get out with this massive debt. And, like we're saying before with the suicide rate, it's like, that's, you just can't get out from under that. So, yes, you can make a decent living, but we're not by any means, and most vets are working. If you're working full time, full time can be 50 to 60 hours a week sometimes. I think that it's better.
So the veterinary life is not as cushy as some people think. You're not a millionaire, Christine?
No, I'm not. I'm fortunate, but I also have another income with my husband too, and
Wow.
it's
And how about you, Dr. Darby? Are you living the rich life that some of your patients seem to think you are?
Yeah. I mean, I don't do bad, but everything's relative. I mean, there are guys that can throw a football that make millions of dollars a year. Is that really, is that worth it? I mean, I think you have to look at the return on investment. If you're a veterinarian, you're out of the workforce for 8 years in order to get your degree. You come out with usually, the average debt is 885,000, but most veterinarians are north of 300,000, or a lot of veterinarians.
Okay.
And
I'm sorry, I'm interrupting. Go ahead.
and what happens for some of those veterinarians is their monthly loan payment is more than their gross pay.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to rely on these income-based debt repayment programs to lower their monthly payment so they can actually take some money home. So I think all things are relative. I think you can do pretty good being a veterinarian, but there's a sacrifice there. It is a stressful job, and I think that that goes along with the salary.
All right. Well, here's a question your patients have. If you're getting by and you have all this debt, okay, is that why it costs $1,000 to have your cat's teeth cleaned or $5,000 for a dog MRI?
Yes. But, what you have to think about is what you're paying for is knowledge and expertise. Okay. So I can hand you a scalpel or I can hand you a dental cleaner and say, okay, have at it. And we'll see what kind of job you do, but I've got training, experience. We use equipment. We have licensed professionals that monitor your animal under anesthesia. So there is a cost associated with that. And I don't base my costs on, whether or not I need to buy another Porsche. I base the costs on what I need to do to cover the expenses that I incur, pay my staff, and have a reasonable return on investment. And that's no different than any other person in business.
We are going to talk more about the costs and the business of veterinary medicine in just a second. On the Brink is brought to you by the Donna Frank team of Berkshire Hathaway Home Services, Blake Realtors. I am really proud of this sponsor. The team is led by my friend, Donna Federico, who is a specialist in luxury property. She's got like 18 years experience in real estate. Her team sets annual sales records. They are the best. They're experts. So I'm telling you, if you care right now or are interested in the future to buy, sell, invest, or just check out real estate, write down this address, DONAFED, DonnaFed@gmail.com. Or you can go to the Berkshire Hathaway Blake Realtors.com. Hey, I just got done ordering 2 really gorgeous coffee mugs from Peacock Pots Pottery. This is a founding sponsor of the podcast. And I just love their stuff. Honestly, it has nothing to do with their sponsoring us. It's all the work of owner Ona Papagiorgio, who I've discovered is an engineer by trade. And she's managed to combine the precision of her engineering background with the prettiness of her artistic disposition. And I think you are going to like their stuff as much as I do. Check it out at peacockpots.com. We are talking with two Seneca Falls, New York veterinary doctors, veterinary medicine doctors, about their business, how rich they are, if they can really talk to animals, and other assorted questions that have been sent in by our listeners. Christine, I didn't give you a chance to weigh in on this whole issue of why the cost seemed to many of your patients, I'm sure you've heard complaints, very
Oh.
high.
Mhm.
Why do I have to pay more for this than I did to get my son to the dentist?
Yes.
Respond to that.
Carl answered it very well, that you're paying for expertise. My old partner, business partner, she would tell the story of a physician, an old-time physician, who a patient went to get an injection of something, and it was like $100. And she's like, wow, why is that so expensive? She goes, well, the medicine is $10, but the $90 is for my expertise in giving it. Okay, which is true. I mean, everybody's had it's everyone's happy when their animal does okay, but there's a lot into that. It's not just going in and cleaning their teeth. And the other thing is, I am very aware of the cost of veterinary medicine, and we can talk about insurance in a little bit, because I think we have ideas on that. But I have colleagues who are like, okay, you go in and you get a procedure done, and you get, like a MRI, and it's $5,000 or $10,000. Okay. And we're able to nowadays do the same things that we can for pets. Okay. And some people want that and some people don't. And that adds another stress factor, because you have people walking in who, hey, the old time view was, okay, this is just a dog. Okay. And, they, live outside, and other people
nowadays it's way different.
Like, to take a day off because not go to work because your pet died. That's a very, very reasonable thing. 30 years ago, that was not. So, the things are, people's perceptions are changing.
You're talking about a societal difference, a big difference in how we treat animals.
Yes.
They are, for many people, children substitutes.
Right.
So
and
here's
don't want to pay for that. And yet we are doing the same things, the same procedures, the same drugs,
correct.
the same monitoring, the same expertise that you would do for a person.
But my question, Christine, is what is reasonable? If I had a child with cancer, no cost wouldn't even be considered. I wouldn't even ask the cost. Should it be the same way for a vet, or is there a limit? Is there a amount past which people should not go?
I think there's an old saying that's, and I'm very guilty of this, don't x-ray the client's pocketbook, meaning you present what can be done, and it's up to the client to decide what they want to do. And for some people, that's going to be no, euthanasia. Other people are going to, spend $10,000 or $20,000 for a very guarded prognosis. And the big thing is not to make judgment, because everybody's different. And, I look at and people ask me a lot, well, what would you do if it was your pet? And I try to be very honest with them and tell them what I can do and what I wouldn't do. And we all have a different perception of that.
Yeah, this is that kind of attitude that you have is the reason that all of your sisters call you to say, this is happening, what should I do? Because we trust that. Dr. Darby, do you have some sort of scale or a measure that you use with patients facing that very awful decision of, you have a really sick dog, can you afford to do something about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think Chris has the right idea, and I think we have to be very careful trying to assume what clients are willing or able to spend. So the way I approach it is, I tell the client what I think is the best thing for the dog medically, and I think we have a responsibility to always give our client all of the options. Now, I have absolutely no problem with people telling me, nope, that's not in the budget, whether they can afford it or whether they just don't value their pet that much. That's their choice. That's their decision. We have to respect that. So we have to give choices. But I think we're failing the animal if we don't give our clients all of the options.
All
So,
of the options that they can,
and then they can pick. And I think a lot of people um, get kind of anxious about that, and they feel like, well, they're going to be judged. And I saw this a lot when I did emergency medicine. That a lot of clients are kind of embarrassed to say that either they can't afford or they don't want to spend that amount of money because they feel like we're going to think poorly of them. And I really don't think that's true. For the vast majority of veterinarians, our job is just to say, this is plan A. If that's not in your budget, let's try plan B. If that's not in your budget, let's try plan C. And in some cases, that plan may be euthanasia. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't.
How about holistic medicine? Is that an option?
If the client wants it, I would say yes. I have no experience with it, so I don't really have an opinion on it, to be honest.
Is this like chiropractical doctors and medical doctors, or do you think there's anything to it? People are asking this. They don't know whether to trust it or not. Christine.
Well, I think Carl and I have different opinions on this. I'm from Ithaca, which likes to do a lot more, out of the box type of thinking. And I like to call it complementary medicine, not holistic medicine, because it complements Western medicine. A lot of vets aren't familiar with it because we aren't taught it. And you're taught in school, everything is science, everything is evidence-based, okay? So you do a study on it. And the problem with complementary medicine is you're not typically doing that just by itself, okay? You're usually adding that to normal Western medicine. So it's hard to have evidence-based stuff on that. So I do think there is a place for it. I also don't have a lot of expertise in it. I can tell you that places like Cornell University now, they have acupuncture, they do PT, I don't know that they have a chiropractor now. I think that they did, but they do have a lot of alternative medicine that they didn't have before. So I think there's a place for it for some people, just like a lot of diseases or multimodality. There's not one treatment. Degenerative joint disease, arthritis, which is very, very common in older dogs. Okay. If you're lucky enough to solve it with just, a dose of a non-steroidal, that's great. But lots of times these alternative things come in. And
okay, so Christine just recently had me buy like a very costly pheromone that I was supposed to spray and diffuse into the atmosphere.
That's not alternative medicine. That's not.
What is that?
That's a pheromone. That's science. Cats have a scent gland.
It didn't work, Christine.
Well, I told you that it works sometimes. Medicine is not an exact science.
What about Carl, raw feeding? That's a big rage now. Good or bad from a veterinary point of view?
It can be fine as long as it's done appropriately. The biggest problem with feeding raw diets is the risk to human health. And if you look at the CDC, there are an alarming number of cases of salmonella in humans related to handling raw meat and feeding their pet. Plus, dogs can then become carriers for salmonella and end up, when they're licking their owners, there can be health issues with that. So I think if you do it under the supervision of a professional that can make sure the diet is balanced, I have no issue with it. But going on the internet and reading what Bob from Wisconsin tells you to do to feed your dog can be a recipe for disaster. And I've seen, unfortunately, quite a lot of animals fed raw diets that have gotten into some pretty serious health problems. So I think it's like there are a lot of fads that go around about, especially with the rise of social media, somebody's idea gets broadcast across the nation and everybody tries it for a while, and then something else comes along and everybody tries that for a while. So it can be done. To be honest with you, I don't think there's any evidence that it's better than feeding regular dog food, I think there are potentials for it to go very badly wrong. There are human health issues with it. And if a client comes to me and tells me they want to do that, I'll point them to the resources where they can get veterinary help in doing it safely and properly. But it's not something I would recommend.
And how about acupuncture? Would you recommend that, Dr. Darby?
I do, and I have recommended that. And one of my other associate actually that works with me at Seneca Falls is undergoing training in acupuncture. And there is actually scientific evidence that for some conditions, acupuncture in animals has been shown to be effective. And
Fascinating.
that's the other thing about alternative medicine is a lot of the information on alternative medicine in animals is extrapolated from alternative medicine in humans. And we know for a fact with Western medicine that some things don't extrapolate well. So some things that do work in people don't work in animals. And I think we have to be a little bit careful with alternative medicine. This is really based on, well, in people, this is what happens. And we have to always understand that it may not be the same in animals. And, you have to kind of
let me run. We're running out of time, and I have many questions. I'm going to run through a few more issues that people have raised. Doggy flu, is this a real thing? And is there something that pet owners should be doing to avoid going to the vet? Christine first.
Well, doggy flu is a very generic term. And right now there's all this media attention to these respiratory diseases that are going around the country. And we don't even know if they're the same thing or not, or if it's just normal bacterial or viral infections that are, plaguing older dogs differently than younger dogs. So, it's just like you and I with the flu. I mean, if you have the flu, do you go to the vet? It depends on a lot of things. It depends on your level. I have some owners who are very, very savvy and they're like, no, I'm really comfortable with this. And others who, want to make sure that they're being very proactive. I'll say to people, the two things to watch for in your pet is attitude and appetite. Okay. If your pet's not eating or they're not eating well, or if they're not following their normal routines, those are the things to consider. And
I consider that in mom too, taking care of my mother, Christine. Yes, I appreciate that. Dr. Darby, how do you feel about sedating animals, like when you want to move or put them in a car for it? Do you approve of this or not? People are very conflicted.
It's a case by case analysis. I don't have broad generalizations for anything, but there are some animals that car journeys are very stressful for, and some light sedation does make a difference. In some animals, it makes things worse. So yeah, I mean, you have to look at these things on a case by case analysis, and sometimes even it's a matter of picking different drugs. I've had some clients that travel with their pets that we've gone through 3 or 4 different medications to find the one that calms them down without having any adverse side effects. So it's something that I don't think is anything wrong with doing that. The only caveat I would say is air travel. I'm very reluctant to sedate animals for air travel. A number of years ago, there were a flurry of cases of animals that were on airplanes that had been given tranquilizers that had major health issues, including some deaths. And our Veterinary Medical Association issued a bulletin to say, be very careful sedating animals that are going in on airline travel. And we didn't really ever figure out what the issue was, but I'm always kind of reluctant to sedate animals for air travel. But as far as car journeys go, absolutely. If the dog's stressed, if we can do something to alleviate that stress, that's fine. In cats, unfortunately, there isn't really much apart from the pheromone that Chris
which doesn't work.
I would disagree with that. I know Carl doesn't use gabapentin, but there is now it's not a newer drug, but it's more used in cats now. I have used that for cats because before this I would agree with you, but gabapentin I have used for cats for sedation in the office, but also for car rides, and it does work well. So I contradict you on that one.
Okay, here's a true confession question. During the pandemic years, the COVID years, we could not bring our animals into you. You had someone meet us in the parking lot and carry in our pet to you. And so that meant you were seeing the animals without their owners nearby. Did you really secretly like that and wish that could continue? Christine?
I don't think Carl's practice did that. When it first started, I have to say, oh my God, yeah, this is way more efficient. I mean, a cat exam, I could do it in 5 minutes. It was, for me at the beginning, it was very, very good. That wore off very, very quickly for me, okay? Because then it just got to, you're standing out in the cold, asking people, history, and then you're bringing them in and you have to go back out and ask them more questions. It became very inefficient. And I also like talking to people. That's one of the things I like about veterinary medicine. So I hated it. And I don't think Carl had to do that in his practice, did you?
Well, Carl, you still have had to deal with the other patient. There's the animal you're actually looking at, and then their owner. That's a certain psychiatry involved in that, isn't it?
There is, and I'm kind of the opposite to Chris. I'm not really very extrovert. I don't really like spending a lot of time talking to clients. But the problem with the kind of COVID, with the not having the owners directly there is it's harder. I found it much harder to get good history and get accurate information, because it's very hard when you're not actually face to face with somebody, really getting all the communication. I'll see clients that we learn to read the body language, and there's so much more nonverbal communication I get from a client than just answering questions, and you lose that, and sometimes it makes me a little bit more uncomfortable. It's like, do I really know what the owner's thinking about this pet if I'm not actually witnessing them, their body language. So I like, we still, in fact, most veterinarians are still not allowing clients back in the waiting room. And that actually, I think, has been a very big help. I have a very small practice. My waiting room is very small. It gets very noisy, and people are trying to check out, and dogs are barking. So from the noise level perspective, and just for the chaos in the office, it's much better just having people waiting in the car. That part of it, we still do, and I have a lot of vet friends that do the same thing, that don't use their waiting room anymore. And
that's interesting.
I know it annoys some clients that they have to sit in their car, but it actually makes things so much smoother. The dogs tend to be calmer because they're not barking. The poor cat doesn't have to sit next to the Rottweiler for 20 minutes. That's growling at it. And, I think it's less stress overall to do that. But I like to interact directly with the client, but I'm not anywhere near as gregarious as Chris is.
Yeah, a few people are. Yeah, a few people are. Ask our family. Yeah. Are veterinarians like doctors? If an animal comes into you and you can see obvious cases of abuse or neglect, are you required to report that to someone? Either one of you can take that. Have you both had experiences with that, Christine?
I don't know if you say, not maybe neglect, but not informed neglect. Okay, just
stupid
ignorance. Yeah. Okay, but I don't know that I've ever had to report anybody, and I don't know if there is a legal thing. Carl, what is your opinion on that? I don't even know if we legally do have to tell somebody. I mean, I would, but I've never had to report anybody to the SPCA. Let me put it that way.
No, I don't think there's a legal requirement. I think there's an ethical, an ethical issue there that I think if we see obvious abuse, intentional abuse, I think we are morally obligated to report it, but I don't think it's a legal obligation. But I think I would concur with Chris. In my 33 years, I can think of maybe 2 cases where there was intentional abuse. The vast majority of cases, it's just the owners are just don't really understand what's going on with the pet there, or there may be compounding issues. But I had a case. It was a girl that was dating a guy. The guy didn't like the cat, and this cat kept coming back in for health issues, and we couldn't really understand why this cat kept getting sick. And then the owner found out that the boyfriend had actually been poisoning the cat.
Oh, that's awful. So what
And
did you do about that?
we actually didn't have to do anything because the guy ended up getting arrested.
Oh, good. Good. He
So,
deserved it. Oh,
but that was the one situation where I think if I'd have had that opportunity, I would have made a phone call, because that was a deliberate attempt,
yeah.
to hurt an animal. But the other side of the coin is, legally, the standards that are set by, ag and markets, the government, for abuse are unfortunately, they're
Right.
pretty grim. If you provide an animal with food and water and some form of shelter, the bar is pretty low. So to kind of prove an abuse or neglect can be quite challenging. And I have a couple of
Hmm.
vet friends that have gone into forensic veterinary medicine, where they actually are called in on cases where there is suspected physical abuse of an animal, and they tell me it's often very difficult to get convictions in those cases, obviously because the witness can't really give you um, any information. So it tends to all be forensic based, if an animal has been abused. But
Okay.
um,
Next question. I'm going to cut you off because I want to get in some of these intriguing questions my listeners have fed me. Okay. Weed for pets. Is there a drug abuse problem among animals?
We see a lot of dogs that get into marijuana toxicity is a very, very common
Wow.
thing that we see now, that ends up in the ER lots of times because they get into the brownies or the package of food or whatever.
Can't you actually buy CBD treats for
Yes, well,
animals?
you can buy CBD oil, which does not have the THC in it. Okay, and this is kind of in the category of complementary medicine. Cornell did a study on it, on one particular type for degenerative joint disease, and they had good results. The problem is, just like anything else, there's everything out there on the market. Everybody has their own CBD oil. Which ones work and which ones don't? The ones that I know that tend to work tend to be very expensive. And I'll tell clients, I go ahead and use it, but I'm not sure you're not going to hurt them, but I'm not sure you're going to help them with it. So it's kind of anecdotal that it helps some animals and not others, but people are using it for everything these days. And,
Okay. Dr. Darby, talk a little bit, please, about the problems that you see because of overbreeding of animals. I had several questions about that. And is there a way, a formula to figure out if you're going to a good breeder or not?
um, overbreeding is, I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. I mean, if you mean that there are too many puppies being produced by
No,
a
I mean breeding for certain
bulldogs.
characteristics.
okay, so yeah, I mean, I think, unfortunately, when we choose a pet, often we're going to base our choice on how the pet looks rather than its health. And I think, unfortunately, traditionally, we've neglected the health issues associated with the way a dog looks. And a bulldog is like the classic example. And I had a vet friend in Connecticut that there was a few bulldog breeders around him, and he'd see bulldogs all the time. And the first thing he'd say to a client when they bring their bulldog puppy in is, "You do realize that your puppy is going to put my kid through college." It was just a realization that, if you buy one of these breeds, understand that this dog is likely going to spend a lot of time at the veterinarian.
Ah,
And there are some veterinarians that actually are pushing to have certain breeds banned. And
Mhm.
bulldogs, the what's called the brachycephalic, the really kind of short, squishy nose dogs, are top of that list. And there are some vets that say these dogs should not be available as pets. They have a miserable life. They're
oh,
constantly struggling. They have a lot of health issues. And my advice to clients is don't pick the breeds that have those chronic health issues unless you have money to burn, and you don't mind watching your pet go through a lot of different medical problems. As far as picking a good breeder from a bad breeder, that's kind of, to me, like buying a used car. It's very, very hard to know. There's not any guidelines I can give you. There's a lot of skullduggery going on in with some pet breeding, where we had a case when I was on Long Island where they were breeding Cavaliers, and they were pumping out so many puppies. It's like, there's no way that these two dogs can have like 50 puppies a year. It's physically impossible. And
oh,
the male and female that were supposedly the mom and dad were both spayed and neutered, and these people were importing puppies from Ireland and selling them as offspring.
Oh my
And they
gosh.
had a very nice setup. It was a beautiful house, and and it was a con. So I think you just have to kind of, it's buyer beware. Get recommendations from other people. Try and see some animals from that breeding pair if you believe that it's actually those. They are actually the parents, but it's a bit of a minefield. I think it's just like, approach it as if you're going to buy a used car.
Christina, last question for you. You work for an online referral. The two of you have been sort of dismissive of people going online to getting information. Are the online referrals different? What's been your experience with
Okay.
that?
Well, this is fairly new with COVID, the telehealth medicine and stuff, and there's legalities and things in it. And so what I'm looking at is I work in a very particular niche where it is all veterinarians. We look at people online, like on Zoom. We give them emergency advice as to whether this is truly an emergency or not, because of the veterinary shortage. And it's so hard to get in with your vet or into an ER if it's after hours. We're there to say, oh, your dog vomited 2 times. I look at them. It's not a full exam, but I look at them. I ask questions, and I'm like, no, this is not an emergency. It can wait until morning.
So it's more like triage than
It's triage. That's what it's called. It's a group that's called Vet Triage. I think, we're just triaging things is what it is.
And the last question for you, Dr. Darby, you own a practice, you have worked in other practices. There's lots of questions among patients, people who use veterinarians, about whether commercialization of veterinary practices has added to costs and declined the quality of care. Do you have an opinion about that?
Well, I think there are pros and cons. I think it's still too early to know for sure. But when you look at a corporation's sole responsibility is to provide a return on investment. That's their driving force. I think that doesn't necessarily mean that the prices are going to be more or the care is going to be worse, but it's a paradigm shift. We've gone from mom and pop veterinary practices where the owner of the practice often has a relationship with the majority of the clients, and to something where the people that are getting profit from that practice have no clue about their client base, about the area, about the people. So I think there's just a different way of doing things. You can argue that corporations are often more efficient and they have better buying power. They can buy drugs cheaper often than I can. They can pass those savings on to owners potentially, or they can use those to increase their profits. So it's an inevitable shift.
Right.
There's nothing we can do about it. I would say to people, it's something that you're going to have to adapt to, because I don't see it going back to being all owned by private practitioners.
I have run out of time, but not out of questions. This has been great, and I hope that I can get the two of you back again at some time in the future to do another session like this. It's been very enlightening. And I would like to end with a toast to veterinarians who make it possible for us to keep in our life pets that bring meaning and joy to lives that sometimes lack all of that except for the pets. Thank you so much for what you do.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to raise a toast to the pet owners that take great care of their animals and they love them. And it makes us feel good to see somebody that really cares about the wonderful animals they bring to us.
Oh, thank you. Pet owners, yeah, I give them short. I'm a journalist, so I'm always looking for the ones who are abusing and are mean to the animals. You might be able. I have this question about whether the Amish abuse their horses. I actually did get a question about that, so we'll bring it up the next
Another
time.
Next podcast.
Next podcast. Thank you both. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
If you are looking for a venue for a family reunion, a corporate gathering, a wedding, I've got a place for you. It's in the woods of Bennington, Vermont. It's a fabulous old house, sleeps up to 12. It was built by this weird kind of genius. He's got fireplaces and a hot tub and a sauna. You can tell I've been here. My favorite thing is probably the pirate ship in the sandbox in the backyard. It's fabulous. It's called Karen's Place. And during these dreary, wintry months, you can get it for a discount. It's worth looking at, worth checking out. The proprietor is a friend of mine, Jenny Dewar, and you can find out more at www.karensplacebt.com. Karen, let me tell you, is spelled Karins. We get lots of comments, all good, about the music we play leading in and leading out of the show and in between the segments. All of it is composed by my friend, composer David Keckley. If you like the music, if you want to see more of what he's done, hear it, you can go to PineValleyPress, all one word, .com. That's based in Williamstown, Massachusetts.